Okay, all right. So thank you very much for joining this webinar. I know that today is a Good Friday. I know that for those who celebrate Easter, but also for it is a break in many universities, in many research institutes and centers and so on. So I'm sorry that these have been probably causing some inconvenience, but we are also happy to share, to break the ice of our COS project with this first webinar. So thank you so much for joining. I will very briefly introduce the webinar, because this is also the first activity that we are launching officially. And this webinar is part of our cost action project, which is called GLITSS, the Globalization, Illicit Trade, Sustainability and Security Cost Action. And this is a project that we have just started, and we aim at working on illicit trade and security, and to fill a research gap by developing several activities and several dissemination activities as well, obviously. So the cost group, the cost project is divided into three working groups. So focusing on the phenomena of illicit trade and the platform behind it, the responses to it. So each working group is composed of different members. Sometimes there is also an overlap of members, which is allowed and possible, and focused on different aspects of this very general and broad topic. And I'm Daniela Herrera. I work at the University of Catania in the south of Italy, and I'm leading working group 2, which is focused on the platform and the governance of illicit trade. And our aim is to have until now 3 webinars on different aspects connected to the global governance of illicit trade. And so I'm very happy to have our first speaker with Ilona Dumanska from Ukraine. She has kindly accepted to break the ice and to be the first one. So her topic is war as a doping for the development of illicit trade, the case of Ukraine. Thank you so much, Ilona. And she will be discussed by Olga Zasklava, who is a political scientist and associate professor. Thank you so much, Olga, for being with us and for accepting to discuss this presentation. They are both based in Ukraine, so we're very, very much interested in the topic. I stop here. I just would like to give you more or less some information on the structure of this webinar. So we have the first presentation, obviously, and so Ilona will start, and then I'll give the floor to Olga for like 15 or 20 minutes, more or less, of discussion, and then we will open the floor. So at the end, or even during the presentation, if you want to type comments or questions or anything in the chat box, please feel free, or at the end you can also raise your hand and I'll give you the floor. So we have 1 hour and a half in total. So I kindly ask Ilona to start sharing a screen and preparing a presentation. So we agreed more or less that she will have like 35 or 38 minutes, that she has been quite strict in her time. And so I will take your time, but I'm sure you will be very, very disciplined. Ilona.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and everyone present. I would like to thank everyone for taking time to participate in this webinar, and especially my thanks to the leader of our group, Daniela Herrera, and the management committee, Francesca Humelli, for the good organization of this event and the opportunity to present my scientific research here and now. At first, I want to say that I work in the wartime. That's why my presentation will recorded by like a video. That's why I present in such case my research, and I hope that my research will be useful for your scientific work and will be interesting. So I start. Today at this webinar, I am Ilona Dumanska, professor from Khmelnytskyi National University, Ukraine. We'll present the first results of my research on the development of illicit trade in the context of military conflicts on the topic War as a Open First Development for Illicit Trade, the case of Ukraine. The key goal of my webinar is detailed analysis of the manifestations for illicit trade in the wartime on basis of cause and effect relationships, and one against proving the role of customs and logistics control in combating illicit trade. After World War II, society issued a call to future generation: never again. This expression defines the reluctance to repeat the history of war and the desire for peace. The illusion that peace, order, and tranquility is a norm that has been lost for a long time. The infographic on this slide shows the countries in which armed clashes involving government forces and rebel groups were reported in 2022. The number of armed conflicts in the world has increased significantly since the end of World War II. Currently, there are about 40 military conflicts in the world in the form of war, border clashes, local conflicts, military coups, terrorist attacks, domestic political crisis, and diplomatic confrontation, of which 13 countries have confrontation lasting more than 10 years. But if before most states fought among themselves, now there's a local conflicts. But often another states take part in them, helping one of the parties. So Ukraine became a state where a full-scale war began with a local conflict in the form of the occupation of Crimea and part of Donbas in 2015, and moved into an open phase of military confrontation from February 2022 to now. Damages caused to Ukraine as a result of Russia's invasion amount to $565 billion. The loss assessment includes damage from immediate disruption and consequences, including worsening economic conditions, rising employment, blocking trade, reducing consumer demand, and disrupting supply chain. Beginning with the Keynes 1919 works, the economic consequences of peace, many studies have shown that wars cause long-term losses to states and societies, especially under conditions of protracted conflicts, which serve as doping for the development of such segment of the shadow economic as illicit trade. For comparison, digital data for the pre-war level of illicit trade in Ukraine was 30% in 2014, 36%, and today 50%. Currently, the risk of consolidating the static indicators of illegal war transfer in view of the new type of war in Ukraine, a hybrid one, which is implemented not only through direct military confrontation, but also through non-military methods, political, economical, cyberspace, and media. In symbiosis of non-military methods of hybrid warfare are conventional measures for gaining advantages during war and getting what the aggressor wants. At the same time, it's this group of methods that are factors in the shadowing of the economy and development of illicit trade. The slide presents generalized key factors: economic, social, ethical, political, administrative, legal, globalization, anthropological, and their determinants. The slide in front of you summarizes the range of main subjects in war conditions, among them individual buyers and sellers, volunteers, business entities, including transnational corporations, government, military, looters, intergovernmental organization, and international organization. On the one hand, the presented subjects are potential witnesses and victims of crimes of illicit trade, and on the other hand, they are their participants and accomplices. Conducted research on Russia's hybrid war against Ukraine made it possible to form a research direction for the development and formation of illicit trade at the local, national, and global levels. As a result, the top 20 manifestations of illicit trade were identified and systematized, which proves the stimulating role of war on the development of market areas and other types of structure of shadow trade in goods and services. They will be covered in detail in this report. So, manifestation 1. responding to the decline in the purchasing power of consumers and shortage of goods, fuel, energy resources, certain groups of food products, and broader demand with changes in the economic situation by satisfying the population demand with the offer of illegal goods from illegal markets and legal goods from illegal markets. The key factors in the development of this manifestation of illicit trade in the conditions of the war were the hype for fuel and food products in the first days of the war. Follows their shortage and price jumps, which benefited speculators and smugglers. It was they who became the first breadwinners during the war in Ukraine. Before you is the case fuel, the beginning of the war. The slide presents an infographic of the sale of legal product fuel from legal and illegal markets. The beginning of the war caused a massive internal integration from the east and south of Ukraine to the west to the borders with Poland, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia. A long trip required a lot of fuel population. As a result, already 3 days after the start of the war, the hype for fuel created a shortage of it. On the slide, you can see the gas station Oker, where the missing number shows the lack of fuel. As the flow of the population to the borders did not stop, the active phase of the war increased the excitement even more. There was no fuel at all. As a result, this time, there are proposals from illegal sale of fuel from hands or illegal gas stations. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the following photos like this. One of the problems was surrogate fuel, which was produced at semi-legal mini gas station and then sold at illegal gas station too. The hype and shortage lasted about a month and a half. During this time, the market organized itself. At the same time, yesterday's illegal fuel dealers became legal gas station, as you see on the slide. So now the next case is food. The infographic shows the situation with the stores empty due to the fear of starvation during the war. Such fear again led to a frenzy on food products, the purchase of goods more than necessary. The result is shortage too. The emergence of speculators and legal markets when stores began to have empty shelves, which is proximately from the end of February 2022 to the middle of March of the same year, markets with spontaneous trade began to develop. As you see in the slide, photos demonstrated it. By this, we don't mean legal markets, but markets on the street and along the roads were taking advantage of the hype and scarcity. Illegal goods were sold, which were quite often damaged or stolen from shops in the occupied territories. Manifestation 2. Impact on the consciousness of consumers by the price speculation as a temptation or to legal purchase at a reduced price and the development of public illicit trade in homemade goods in conditions of impoverishment of the population due to the war. On this slide, you can see the key result of these manifestations. The transition to the sale of home products outside legal sale channels, moonshine brewing as a reaction to the rise in alcohol prices and its shortage, as well as appearance of low-price cigarettes that were sold without excise stamps, which indicate their illegality region. But the demand for these goods, which were cheapened by illicit traders, was extremely high in view of impoverishment of war due to rising price. On this slide, you are presented with the impact of the rapid increase in prices for basic groups of products and goods on the impoverishment of the population and motivation to purchase goods of dubious quality and origin, and to change the markets of legal trade to channels of illegal purchases. The next, manifestation 3. The loss of the official business in the battle for polity, in the competition with the shadow merchant, in the burden of war events. The taxation factor in legal trade places a burden on official business, while illicit traders don't pay taxes and therefore benefit and crowd out official traders. So the question of who is the winner and who is the loser in the battle for competitive equality becomes rhetorical. It is obvious that is in the condition of the war, when the tax payment control function cannot be implemented in full, the winner is the illicit trader who doesn't not pay taxes. The photo materials presented on the slide show a divested official market where the prices of goods due to the payment of taxes are higher than in the spontaneous market near the road, where the prices of goods are lower by 20–30%. Manifestation 4. Adaptation and formation of dependence of civilian population in peaceful and occupied territories to use of illegal sales channels for everyday transaction in trade operation. The protracted military conflict in the east of Ukraine since the beginning of 2014 has created the practice of everyday transaction for the supply of goods in a legal way, both in small batches, example photo on the slide, and in large ones. The need for goods in the occupied territories is currently realized through 5 methods of goods movement. Through the checkpoints on the roads, through humanitarian logistics centers, through the checkpoints on the railway, avoiding the specified transit corridors, and the terminal transit. On the basis of research by international groups and interviews with volunteers and military personnel, we established that large batches of any works are being delivered to the occupied territories, while the occupied power, under the guise of the Russian military, demands payment for the passage of these goods. The occupiers' prices for the passage of trucks are present on the slide. Truck tolls have changed over time and may vary by unit, destination, and log itself. This the driver must pay the following approximate fare through the one road block. As you see in the prices demonstrate the prices for estimated cost of pass through the one road block. And there is also a green corridor supplies through all red blocks, where you can pass through all road blocks without any obstacles for a fixed price. Manifestation 5. Emergence of new types of cybercrimes in the field of trade in cryptocurrencies under the conditions of public excitement regarding their acquisitions due to the devaluation of the national monetary unit and the ban on the purchase of foreign currency. The war led to an increase in the value of the dollar and the euro, which were the currencies in which the population tried to preserve their savings between inflation. Cryptocurrency has become an alternative to expensive currency, and its execution on illegal exchanges has led to a significant number of frauds regarding the real exchange rate of cryptocurrencies, commissions for executions, and non-return of funds. But at the same time, the same exchanges worked quite effectively for the benefit of officials and not the population. It was their practice of saying that was an example for the population and formed trust in the crypt. The slide presents information from the declaration of officials who owned cryptocurrency in the pre-war period and still managed to get rid of it on the eve of the war. So, manifestation 6. Politicization of illicit trade due to the penetration of criminal figures into the government and business in wartime conditions. The key spheres of politicization of power are control over specialized state devices and ministries. Every government that comes to power appoints the head of customs, tax service, and Ministry of Finance in order to avoid illicit trade as it wasted the country's budget. The practice of pre-war personnel reshuffles is disappointing. On the slide, you can see that during 1 year, the head of customs changed 5 times, the head of the tax service 4 times, and the Minister of Finance 3 times. It is obvious that the instability of the government and the personnel reshuffle lead to irresponsibility for the consequences of the development of illicit trade in the country. Manifestation 7. The development of legal practices of increasing military orders, which later lead to illegal arms trade and illegal practices, smuggling goods across the demarcation line, and financing terrorism. We emphasize that, according to the data of 2022, Ukraine became the third largest importer of the large weapons in the world, which is due to Russia's military aggression and the need to counter it. At the same time, the surplus of processed weapons causes its surplus, which can be used for the emergence of new areas of wars in the world, or the emergence of dictatorships that will be supported by armed formations. It's not good for our mind. The slide shows the top 10 arms manufactured by profitability. The infographic is notable for the ranking in which there are 3 companies from China in the top 10 arms manufacturers, which demonstrated geopolitical transformation in the world. Manifestation and 9 in front of you on the slide. The lack of customs control due to the loss of the function of control over state borders led to the emergence of new areas of production and sale of illegal goods, weapons, excise goods, cigarettes, alcohol, drugs, trade in humanitarian aid, including both of occupied territories since 2014 and during the full-scale attack in 2022. The result was the formation of new logistics networks and their further inclusion in the global routes of illicit trade and organization of regional clusters of markets for the illegal sale of the goods and others. Manifestation 10. Human trafficking is such form as use in military conflicts, involvement in criminal activities, forced labor, adoption for commercial purposes. The International Criminal Court in The Hague has issued international arrest warrants for the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, as well as the Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, on suspicion of the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children, which is a type of crime in the field of human trafficking. Since the beginning of the war, 6,000 children of Ukraine have been taken out of the territory. Currently, a network of camps for ideological re-education and adoption of Ukrainian children have been created on the territory of Russia and temporarily occupied Crimea. It consists of at least 43 institutions, most of which house children from Ukraine aged 4 months to 17 years. There is a suspicion that such ideological re-education of children may in the future lead to the involvement of already adult children in military conflicts. The next manifestation 11. Abuse of social services and their illicit trade. The emergence of the phenomenon of double social independence. The constant migration of internally displaced persons across contact lines creates a wall system that severs them. Intermediation services are actively provided in registration of various types of assistance for immigrants, the possibility of receiving a double pension or paying for educational and medical services. The slide shows a photo of a bulletin board with an announcement in Ukrainian language about mediation in the occupied territories for the registration of a pension with the departure to a peaceful territory, which is an example of illegal mediation in the trade of social services and abuses of their dual receipt, since dual citizenship is prohibited in Ukraine. Manifestation 12. development of the market for illegal border crossing devices by men, avoiding military devices, and mediation in trade and logistics with the occupied territories. The slide shows a photo of an attempt of illegally across the border by man subject to mobilization, like gift under the bus seats. Also featured is in screenshot from a phone messenger posting guaranteed mail border crossing device with price $3,500. Such a manifestation is the type of illicit trade, but not of goods, but of devices in this sphere. Manifestation 16, smuggling of goods on the border with other countries and territories bordering on hostilities. Shuttle trade by the population of cross-border territories in the form of fragmented batches of excise goods and other groups of goods. At the same time, smuggling in wartime is based on schemes that arose during peacetime. On the slide, I used the customs official slang for typical smuggling schemes. So the first, I describe the scheme that called will be green, or the movement of goods outside border checkpoints through forests and fields. Traditionally, the most leaky borders in Ukraine were considered to be the borders in the Zakarpattia region, which, among other things, is famous for the huge circulation of counterfeit tobacco products. Jackets. The scheme provides for the creation for a fairly large group of persons who bring a batch of products to the territory of Ukraine. They enjoy the benefits provided by the legislation for individuals who cross the border with the goods purchased not for commercial resale. The next scheme will be empty transport. This scheme is always tied to the human factor. Today, the presence of undeclared cargo is the so-called empty transport is carried out by customs officials without any external control. Unreliable declaration. The whole essence of the process is in its name, underestimating the weight, quantity, dimensions, custom value, declaring goods not according to their code or name, hiding the real brands of product manufacturing or quality characteristic of the goods. It gives opportunity for smugglers to pay not so many tax, minimize their size. That's why this scheme is very popular. The next, fashion brokers, is a scam involving companies that work mainly on leased territories near the customs and have certain special conditions for custom clearance of large consignments of cargo. The next, smuggling by mail or post. Was quite a popular phenomenon until recently. At the same time, the very idea of purchasing cheaper goods abroad that didn't require customs clearance during delivery was in demand not only among smugglers but also among ordinary buyers too. The list of top smuggling schemes is routed off by the so-called interrupt transit. In order to implement this procedure, the goods markets as transits either replaced during transit through the territory of Ukraine or simply disappear and are subsequently brightened off by formally closing by transit. Manifestation 14. Illegal extraction of strategic natural resources and theft of grain, formation of schemes for their sale through official and unofficial channels against the background of the food and fuel crisis in the world. The main figures are present on the slide. The objects of appropriation are billions of revenues from the sale of coal, roundwood, and grain. In the conditions of the war, the situation with the food security, in particular with the export of the grain from the territory of Ukraine, turned out to be critical. The slide presents information about the movement of stolen Ukrainian grain on the ship Matros Pozinich from the occupied Crimea to Egypt by the Russian occupiers. Manifestation 15. Special development and emergence of new areas of illicit trade in the occupied territories under the control and armed groups participating in hostilities. The emergence of spontaneous markets for the sale of looted goods under the open sky is the territory of Russia and Belarus, as well as their sale using illegal transactions by mail and other delivery of payment devices. The slide presents information from the resource Belarusian Hayun, publication regarding the sale of looted property by Russian soldiers through Belarus by the mail and on spontaneous trade markets by open sky. Manifestation 16. Asymmetric violence in conflicts, which is exacerbated by the inequality of participants in access to power and different status in order to maintain control over the receipt of income from illicit trade. The practice of extortion and misappropriation of income by the occupation authorities is typical, but the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the territory of Ukraine was reinforced by the desire not only to return power over the segment of illicit trade, but also by cracking down on business owners by illegally imprisoning them in prisons and acquiring ownership of their property at this time. We have summarized the following methods of obtaining and maintaining control over the receipt of income from illicit trade. The first, using the business of the victim country to carry out destructive or illegal activities, financing of terrorists, uncontrolled typical projects, withdrawal, laundering of funds, and so on. And the second, the use of the victim's country's economic capacities in its own economic interests with harmful consequences for the victim country itself. For example, establishing control over the victim country raw materials base with subsequent production of weapons from these raw materials. Manifestation 17. Deviant reactions of civilian population under conditions of emotional tension to looting according to the principle violence begets violence in manifestation of extreme cruelty during lynching in the event of establishing the facts of trade in stolen property that was in their possession. During the war, Ukrainians detained theirs of their own, often using illegal and dangerous methods. In particular, on March 4th, 2022, a 38-year-old man died in Volynsk, who was tied to a pole due to looting. Reports by the resource Zahid.net. Manifestation 18. Legal gaps in persecution for illicit trade and looting in conditions of war at the level of national and international legislation, ineffectiveness of international security institutions in the field of trade. According to the article of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, looting is the theft of things of those killed or wounded on the battlefield. However, in wartime, looting means theft committed not only on the battlefield, but also in other territories during martial law. This is exactly the position laid out in the law of Ukraine on amendments to the Criminal Code of Ukraine on strengthening and liability for looting. In international practice, this are not only crimes on the battlefields. Undoubtedly, the level of responsibility needs to be strengthened. It is worth noting that the very name of looting is different. For example, in Eastern Europe, called not looters, called marauders. That's why I sometimes use these words because it will be more useful in Ukraine, Poland, and Belarus. The next, manifestation 19. The danger of consolidating illicit trade practices over time due to the prolongation of military operation and their transfer to the post-war period in the form of a shadow economy organized on the experience of wartime. The experience of protracted armed conflicts in the post-war period indicates the establishment of illicit trade practices, which identifies the urgency of avoiding protracted hostilities as a prolonged lack of control creates sustainable channels of illicit sales of goods and services. In slide, you can see duration of some military conflicts in the world. And you see these countries, Sudan, Somalia, the Philippines, Myanmar, and so on, have not very good result in practice of legal trade. They have very big problem with illicit practice. And the last, manifestation 20. Establishment of dictatorship of illicit trade in the world based on methods of hybrid warfare, blackmail, blockade, and looting. Europe depends on Russia's energy resources at the beginning of the war led to certain phenomena of initial political economic attitude to the war in Ukraine and therefore to the development of illicit trade, which is open for its development on an increased scale, which at first is an obvious influence on the global trends of the growth of illegal trafficking of goods and services, but over time it increasingly manifests itself in a negative impact on the economies of the countries and crime in the world. Thus, the conducted studies of the top 20 manifestation of illicit trade in the condition of Russia's hybrid war against Ukraine made it possible to form the direction of research into the practices of its development and formation according to such groups of factors as financial, economical, social, physiological, political, and legal at the local, national, and global, as well as identify the role of illicit trade not only in goods but also in services that arise as a concomitant phenomenon in the conditions of hybrid warfare. At the same time, the analysis of the features of the interpretation of the research subject in the scientific discourse allows us to make several generalizations that present the slide. The first, there is illicit trade financially, economically, socially, physiologically, political, and legally caused by a negative phenomenon, and together with that, an inseparable companion not only of war but also of social life. The second, illicit trade involves the use by criminals of their powerful position for the purpose of illicitly obtaining additional benefits and exclude equality in the competition. The third, it is practically impossible to completely eradicate illicit trade similarly to sanctioning in 100%. Therefore, the main task is to contain it and reduce its negative impact on the functioning of society, and guarantee of which is a comprehensive study taking into account many variables. The fourth, war change states priorities and weakness its ability to provide certain goods and services during wartime, including basic needs for the civilian population, while creating opportunities for participants in illicit trade to fill the gap. The fifth, illicit markets during war include not only the trade of illicit goods, resources, and services, but also include the trade of legitimate goods, items, and daily demands through illicit channels. The sixth, illicit trades can be prerequisite not prolonging the military conflict due to the reluctance in criminals to lose profits. And the last, it will be adaptation to the war over time due to the prolongation of the military conflict complicates the liquidation from structures of illicit trade, their legislation, and spread beyond the territory of the war. The research information base was international legislation, national legal acts of Ukraine, data of the state statistics devices of Ukraine and state customs devices, publication by researchers and operational internet information from official sources, conducted interviews. In the slide, you can see that interviews was with persons from the war zone, military, volunteers, custom officials, and with business representatives from the occupied territories. So my report is complete. Thank you for your attention. If you have some comments or questions, I will be glad to give answers.
Thank you very much, Ilona. It was indeed very informative and very clear, detailed. Also, thank you for grouping everything in manifestations of illicit trade in war in Ukraine, during the war in Ukraine, because it was very clear how all these things happened. And it is once again another demonstration that we need to go back to the relations between illicit trade and war, ongoing war, or even frozen war, because there are implications, even new implications, that need further research. So this is something that we should consider, and it is also part of our research agenda, at least in our working group, obviously. So thank you so much, Ilona. Olga, can you please start your discussion? If you can stay in about 15 minutes, that would be ideal.
Okay, I'll try. Okay. Hello to everyone, and it's very good to see these people today. Thanks for the opportunity to communicate with you. And before I begin, I'd like to thank the organizers of this webinar for this opportunity. And then, okay, I'll try to demonstrate. Do you see? Not? No. No.
Yeah, we can see now.
Yeah, you see. Okay, thank you. And now, okay, everything is okay. Do you see the microphone? Okay. I would like. Okay, so let's get the rolling ball. I'd like to take this opportunity to discuss the main conclusions of the research that Ilona has just presented to you, focusing on its political dimension. And it might be useful to start with understanding the official position of the Ukrainian political elite. And for this purpose, I quote Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. In one of his addresses, the president of Ukraine emphasized that there would be no more shadow in the country. There are many discussions in Ukraine today about what the economic policy of the state should be both during the war and when the restore peace. I want to emphasize one detail, and this detail is fundamental. We have to get used to the fact that there can be only two parts of society, those who defend our independence and those who work in a way to ensure that defense. And this is not a question for one or another economic doctrine, not a question of one or another political position. We simply cannot afford to leave the shadow part of economic life in the country. Of course, I understand that in some of our regions now, any economic activity, official or non-official, is a matter of mere survival. It's really true. But if we talk about the normal, stable, strong life of society, at the back of the state, our defense, we must understand that there are those who serve and there are those who provide with their work those who serve. So this official employment, this is the payment of taxes, this is the maximum expansion of economic opportunities in our country on legal ground. And this is complete modernization of state institutions. Everyone who works in Ukrainian politics, who influence the public debate, should realize that there would be no more shadow in the country. So we have a question. Is it realistic to implement such changes, especially in wartime? First, we should understand the level of Ukrainian economic development and the main economic challenges. We can track the trajectory of the key economic metrics. And Ukraine economy has been hit hard really by the devastation of the Russian invasion and the need to divert productive capacity and labor to the war effort. The figures give a glimpse of just some of the economic changes, the wide and persistent gap between government revenue and government spending, the soaring inflation rate that stemmed from the central bank printing money to fill that gap, and the consequences to the trade deficit of crippling Ukrainian exports. What happens in the shadow trade sector in wartime? The other question that we ask. In 2022, despite the wartime, the situation in the shadow market has not improved. There is a significant increase of the illegal sector for certain goods. And the main schemes of illicit trade, illegal export, import of goods are black smuggling, illegal movement of goods across the custom border outside of custom control, interrupted transit, goods imported into Ukraine are exported only on paper. In fact, they're unloaded and left on the territory of country without paying any taxes, abuse of privileges, partition of commercial lots of goods under the guise of international postal or express shipments, custom fraud and corruption schemes, underestimation of value, weight, substitutions of documents, and reducing the tax base. Within the country, goods that were entered or produced without paying taxes are sold according to the following schemes. Completely illicit trade, when goods are sold without paying any taxes and without issuing any documents. Trade in stores that have the necessary registration documents, but sell one part with payment of taxes and the other part without payment. Remote trade via the internet without registration of transactions and without displaying real sales volumes in declaration. The war in Ukraine has led to disastrous level of suffering, death, and destruction in country. It has caused the fastest forced population movement since the Second World War. Nearly 8 million people have crossed the border, leaving their homes behind. Ukraine shares its eastern border with Russia, its northern border with Belarus, and its western border with the European Union. The Black Sea demarcates Ukrainian southern border. So this unique geographical position makes Ukrainian an advantageous location for international networked organized crime groups to bear the operation, especially in wartime. Conflicts and instability have long been fertile ground for organized crime and criminal networks, to which Ukraine and the wider region are not exception. We know that wars usually weaken state capacity, resulting in a conducive environment for organized criminal activity. Criminal groups may take advantage of the chaotic and regulated circumstances to smuggle rare commodities under the fog of the war, and these activities may become protracted and permanent when the active phase of the conflict is over. However, at the same time, the uncertainty and violence of war can also threaten traffickers, especially during active warfare. Since February 2022, several contrasting accounts have emerged on changes to the landscape of criminal activities in Ukraine. Some illegal networking schemes, such as arms and human trafficking, experienced a significant boost from the condition of war. Other industries, such as, for example, illicit trade in timber, have plummeted. Illicit trade in various commodities suffered only temporary setback and rebounded soon. While some local production of illicit goods declined in the first weeks of the war, as the violence has progressed, human trafficking and the illicit markets in arms, drugs, and other commodities have either grown or remained at the same level. The only lasting disruption appears to be the disintegration of illicit trade networks stretching across the combat lines in Donetsk and Lugansk. The previous armed conflict in the Donbas region was a contributing factor to the activity of different organized crime in the country. The so-called Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics had effectively become bandit kingdoms, sustaining themselves mostly by smuggling and contraband. These smuggling networks also had a very close relationship with their counterparts in Russia. Before February 2022, Russia and Ukraine's legal and illicit actors had a few qualms about doing illegal business together. Illegal trade in various commodities across the contact line in the Lugansk and Donetsk regions was prevalent. While before February 2022, cross-border criminal cooperation between Ukrainian and Russian criminal groups was commonplace. This is no longer the case. And the war has allowed new and imagined organized criminal enterprises to develop and expand. New activities include the transportation of commercial goods under the guise of humanitarian aid, smuggling the deficit products such as fuel and lubricants from neighboring countries into Ukraine, smuggling of newly sanctioned goods, and trade in looted commodities such as grain from Ukraine. There is growing concern regarding the increased flow of legal firearms and illicit substances toward the European Union. The availability of arms may increase risk of crime and terrorist-related violence across Europe and beyond. The war has generated plenty of opportunities for traffickers and human smugglers, putting especially women and children at risk, and there is an urgent need for preventive and monitoring measures. Significant demand has also risen for the smuggling of military-aged men out of country. These examples demonstrate how transitional crime can rapidly transform in Europe, its borderlands and its seaports. The war may result in change in routes and shift in production, allowing for new opportunities for criminal networks to emerge in Ukraine and across the wider region. Some changes may be permanent, while others may be transitory as power dynamics and physical threats shift. For example, as of October 2022, Odessa is no longer the regional smuggling hub. It used to be before the war. As illicit and unregulated cargo has been rerouted to physically more safer ports, it's uncertain whether the illicit cargo will return to previous trafficking routes, such as through Odessa. The war has also elevated the risk of radioactive emission from the occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants, while compromising security at various other facilities containing chemical, nuclear, radioactive, or biological materials. The vulnerabilities include the quality devastating potential from leakages and the risk of theft and illicit trafficking of dangerous materials such as nuclear and radioactive substances. The implication for international security could be extremely damaging if some of these materials were stolen under the fog of the war and diverted to the illegal market. And we can look at some of these problems, and for example, human smuggling and trafficking in persons. Nowadays, it's a very awful problem in Ukraine, and traffickers have recruited and exploited victims in Ukraine, and Ukrainians have been recorded as trafficked both domestically and internationally for many years. In recent years, Ukraine has adopted various anti-traffic measures, such as increasing the number of investigations and doubting the number of traffickers convicted. But however, the war stunted their enforcement. And in March 2022, the Ukrainian government communicated to the United Nations Secretary General that it couldn't guarantee full implementation of the Palermo Protocol until territorial integrity was destroyed. So the war has generated additional opportunities for traffickers and human smugglers. And there is already established evidence that war is the key driver of human traffickers. The war has generated opportunities for traffickers and human smugglers, ranged from providing illicit service of forging documents and smuggling men of military age across the Ukrainian border. These men are banned from leaving Ukraine by the law, to abusing the vulnerable status of refugees in host countries. Of the million who fled Ukraine, 90% are women and children, the most vulnerable targets of such trafficking. So risk of victims are particularly severe in Russia, where tens of thousands of Ukrainians trafficked there before 2019 found themselves in modern slavery. In Europe, the problem may become more acute when refugees enter the labor force, with some finding employment in the maybe informal or criminal economy. Media outlets and non-government organization reports have cited Thomson Reuters data indicated huge spikes in online researches for explicit content and sexual services from Ukrainian women and girls. For example, the United Kingdom searches for Ukrainian export increased by 200% after the breakout of the war. Ukrainian bonds saw a 600% increase in internet interest in Spain, and the pattern is the same in other European countries. And this is a very worrying trend, because nearly 40% of sex trafficking victims have been recruited online. So I'd like to move to another form of illicit trafficking of arms. What creates the condition for the accumulation of weapons, often outside direct state control? The end of wars tend to lead to an illegal outflows of those weapons into the hands of the criminal groups, both within the competent nations and beyond it. And this is an established history of illicit arms trafficking in Ukraine, dating back to the fall of the Soviet Union, when large amounts of small arms and light weapons were left behind, some control and inventory control. According to the small arms survey, the portion of nearly 7 million small arms stocks held by the Ukrainian military war diverted to conflict areas. And even before the February 2022 invasion, many were concerned about the quantities of illicit military weapons discovered by Ukrainian authorities. And there is a consequences among experts that Ukraine's large black market dedicated to the sale of firearms has further grown since the outbreak of armed conflict, and more Western-produced heavier weaponry has now backfilled in it. In June 2022, the head of Interpol expressed worry that after the end of the war, the arms from the Ukrainian war zone would be traded internationally. And the war in Ukraine has significantly increased the opportunities for illicit arms trafficking, both regionally and to them from the European Union. And existing criminal structure and trafficking routes can give individual within aligned intentions to this weapon and the possibility to smuggle them across the borders. And I want also turn our attention to the international economic consequences of the Ukrainian war. The war between Ukraine and Russia will have long-term consequences on the international order. The war has accentuated the region's political divides and caused significant geopolitical shifts. The war and Ukraine's destabilization has already several significant implementations for organized crime, illicit trafficking, security challenges in multiple ways across its border and globally. The Russian war in Ukraine threatens global food security, especially in the Middle East and North Africa region. This is a risk for the stability of the southern and eastern Mediterranean in the European neighborhood, because the Russian war in Ukraine has increased stress in the global food supply chain. Also, the Russian attack on Ukraine had a profound impact on the European trade policies. The war hit the global economy by creating a new geopolitical and economic uncertainties, soaring energy prices, disruption of the global value chains in which Russian and Ukrainian companies were involved. It has also put a new focus on the geopolitical risks through over-dependence of autocracies relating to the future trade relations with Russia and China. And we can conclude significant reorientation toward a more geopolitical trade policy. And now let's come back to the question that was asked at the beginning of this report. Will Ukrainians be able to overcome the shadow economy during the war? The main conditions for this are the readiness of the Ukrainian society and the new quality of management. As for the economic component, shadow employment, sale purchase of illegal goods, in particular smuggling, the success of this will depend in particular on the readiness of the society. The shadow economy arises due to the desire of people to reduce the payment of taxes and desire to buy cheaper. The war greatly changed the mobilized society, so we have every reason to expect that Ukrainian society will support our president's position. In Ukraine, we need to create a model of the economy that would allow us to eliminate these defects, for example, black economy, and build an advanced economic model. Institutional reform in fact, its fundamental change should take place. If the state apparatus doesn't demonstrate a new quality of management, then unfortunately achieving this goal is not realistic. If they demonstrate it, then it's quite possible to achieve the goal even in wartime. And the other thing is business wants a level playing field. In order to stimulate business to come out of the shadow, it's necessary to ensure a level playing field. This basis of business is competition. If I see that my competitor is gaining an advantage due to shady employment, shady sales of goods, paying less taxes, and this is not stopped by the relevant government authorities, then I will eventually start doing the same in order not to lose my competitive advantage. Otherwise, I will offer the goods in a high price and will not be able to sell them. A level playing field is achieved by clear, transparent rules and effective supervision of the implementation of these rules. If this will be ensured, if the movement in this direction will take place, then we can quite realistically expect the fulfillment of the goal announced by the president. Thank you for listening, and I hope that it was interesting for you.
Thank you very much, Olga. It was more than interesting. You both provided several data and lots, as you are obviously doing your field work, and you are providing to us case studies that you are living daily. So it is absolutely very, very interesting. I now open the floor with some time for a discussion. So I don't see any question typed in the chat box, but so I kindly ask everyone to raise a hand and start talking if you want to raise you want to have your question or comments or anything. I have my own comment, but I will leave later. Please, I open the floor. Well, I may start. So at this point, probably other people will come following that. So I would just like to make a very, very brief comment on what is happening in Ukraine that you also described so well, comparing with all my quite old research now at this point I did in the Balkans, and for example in the Balkans, what I have analyzed was the during the war, but also after the war, because it took time to recover and also to how can I say, to channel the aid which was coming from the EU into you know, in a economy which was not a shadow economy, obviously. But at the same time, I was more working on the wide constellation of actors that were involved in illicit trade during the war in the Balkans. So there were different kinds of actors, so the organized crime groups, as you mentioned, but at the same time, there were also some kind of mixed actors, obviously non-state actors, but some kind of actors which were not exactly criminals because they have no real expertise in criminality, but they were coming from, you know, from army or from paramilitary bodies, and they turn into illicit activities, and then obviously this created a mix of actors that were working in the same environment at the same time. And all of them had, to some extent, relations with the local political elite, particularly in countries like in Serbia or Montenegro. That then it was clear. I'm happy to hear both about your opinion on the point of view of actors which are involved, because obviously we have seen and we have heard from you several data about activities and fields and goods. But from the point of view of actors, what we can say more specifically is what kind of actors are more predominantly acting in illicit trade? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, dear Daniela. In my presentation, I talked about the subject of illicit trade in Ukraine. And at first glance, the subject as military or volunteers, it will be the part of the help for Ukrainian people, yes. But in the second glance, it can be the actor of illicit trade, because they have some power, some opportunities, take part in different supply chains and have special rights in transportation of some goods. That's why it will be some new subject and some new actors in situation of illicit trade, especially in the situation of war. It's not only in my country, its situation was all time in military conflicts of other countries. For example, in Afghanistan, the military was the main actors in the illicit trade of drugs, because in the territory of this country all time was grows many narcotics and drugs, and that's why military who have opportunity travel by countries have opportunity take part in their jackets some drugs, and then to trade these products for in another countries. And especially in situation in Ukraine, the volunteers, not very good volunteers, maybe I want to say it, begin to be a subject of illicit trade too, because they have opportunity to go with any problems on occupied territories and back with very big control, and that's why they have additional rights to be the part of illicit trade, because they have opportunity of transportation, illicit food, some other things that will be needed for the population in occupied territories. And if I have comparison with military conflict in other countries, situation, for example, with Syria, and if some African conflicts, we have the same. When volunteers have some rights, and if you have some rights, you have opportunity to use it. And that's why how you use your rights, you have opportunity to understand about that you begin to be the subject of crime or not. So that's why I think that if you have some additional rights, you can work and doing only in conditions of legislative power.
All right,
So,
thank you so much. Lots of room for research in further research. Thank you. Olga, do you want to add anything about that?
If you allow me, I want to add several words. Maybe, do you hear me?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, okay. So I want to add to Ilona's words one more actor. It's the representatives of the authorities, unfortunately. Local authorities, especially local authorities, because we are at the time when different opportunities, yes, some people try to use, and unfortunately, because of the level of corruption in our country, we can consider that yes, we have such actor also, such local, not local authorities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, this is also something that is a common element of several conflicts at the level of institutional corruption, which is also common to many post-conflict zones. So there's also obviously not something that ends with war, but also affects the post-conflict area for several years, and it is hard to be fixed. Okay, thank you. Once again, any other question or comment on the part of the audience? Yaroslav, please.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, colleagues, for interesting presentation and discussion. So, Ilona, you mentioned that there were many changes in the heads of custom office, taxation office, Minister of Finance. And in fact, for me, it's interesting, what is about, how to say, regular employees of customs office who are taking care of all this prevention of illicit trade and checking and control. Does Ukraine have enough capacities still to control its borders? It will be first question. And next question, does Ukrainian custom invest in equipments, which some modern equipments at that days? Because I think that for sure you have some other priorities, as you have mentioned, that the import of arms is growing. So does custom has also opportunity to invest in equipment which can detect illicit trade and some other things? So are there any investments actually at that time? Thank you.
Thanks, Yaroslav. So there's another question from Raluca. So I suggest we collect the second question if there is one or two more, and then we have the final round. Raluca,
okay,
please.
Thank you. Yeah, can you hear me?
Thank
so
you,
my
Yaroslav.
question.
Yes. As the customer logistics report, it will be the main sphere of my research. And problem with the war in Ukraine, it will be the problem with customs and with logistics in Europe too. Why? Because we are the part of logistics system in Europe, and we transitional country. This situation, what has happened with military conflict, I want to add that during last years, especially from maybe 2018, Ukraine began to be a full member of European Union, and we have the agreement of association with the European Union. And using these documents, we trying to give changes in our economic and political situation, especially in customs. For example, during last years, we have conception smart customs. It's custom where I use all time equipment and all time using some procedures and norms that will be declared in agreement of associated with European Union. And first result we have very positively. For example, during the beginning of the war, we have more big profit from import taxes because we have opportunity to control situation with interrupted transit from territory of other countries. And today customs control will building in the control scheme, and we using such element of system and NCTS. It will be the experience of European Union, and especially it's very help to work with European country and don't have development of smuggling from Ukraine to the Western countries. I hope I give answered your question.
Raluca?
Yes, so my question is from the point of view of organized crime, because you mentioned and you showed a map regarding the flows of illicit trade between the borders from the eastern border with Russia and from the western border with Europe and some countries from European Union. And I was wondering if you have any findings regarding the organized crime networks and the actors involved. Do they involve only Ukrainians? Are there the networks, do they comprise also citizens from other countries? So are there what we call to be foreign actors in these networks? Also, in the eastern border with Russia, there are these thieves-in-law, which are very well known. Do you have any findings if they collaborate with the Russian Vorzagoniet, something the name in Russia is? Also, do they use the same flows? For instance, I'm Romanian, and we know that there are these illicit trade regarding tobacco. So we mentioned several other goods like drugs, arms, if there are any findings. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. First, it's a very actual problem, and I want to detailize that the situation with the war in Ukraine divides the territory of country, especially Ukraine, in eastern part, the past were occupied territory, and territory of central and west part. The main subject in the conditions of the war, maybe in my mind, it stopped any smuggling from the western borders to the Europe, and I hope that we have opportunity to do this. But we have a very big problem with organized crime and different groups that want to be a part of the power in Ukraine, especially those who try and provide some law that give opportunity not control custom very good, for example, and this crime will be have the actors from the legislative power. That's why I, in my presentation, show the aspect of politicization of the power of Ukraine. For example, it was examples about the head of custom and head of tax devices, where the groups who organize very good, trying to save their power and trying to be the element of the power of some country. That's why we describe this element in our presentation. But at the same time, we have some maybe crime group in local level who are trying to be the part of this politicization system. That's why we try to use the law of European Union at first in the crime and in the economic. And if we're talking about, I think that Luciana from Romania, yes, we have the problem with the borders with Romania, and I know it's very traditional to talk with about illicit trade with the border of Ukraine and Romania, because the schemes that will be used in smuggling, it's like calling jackets. When one man using opportunities, not pay taxes, take cigarettes, and 3 times during the one day go from one country to others, and for example organize a crime in smuggling, and especially if it will be organized on some groups, 10 and more bigger people, it will be a very big result, and a very negative result for the smuggling on the territory of Romania and other territories. And especially in the situation of war conflict, from the occupied territories, the illicit tobacco products comes to the borders, to the Romania and western borders. That's why we need to protect these borders of our neighbor countries from the smuggling. And I think it will be the new status of Ukraine, of country who have the law at the first sight. So I finished.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you. Yeah. Maybe we have time for the very last question. But I don't see any other hand raised. So maybe Olga would like to add the last comment on these last 2 questions, if you like, only if you like. No?
The answers of Ilona were very full, so I don't have any comments to this.
Okay, just wanted to be sure that you have also the chance to reply if you like. All right. Okay. For presenting research, and for Olga for discussing, and for the audience for joining, and also for interacting. And you will receive information about the next upcoming webinars. So please continue to join and be part of our dissemination activities. So also enjoy Easter break for those who celebrate, and enjoy the weekend for those who do not celebrate. So thank you so much. Till next. Bye-bye.